Okay, so let's talk a little bit about chapter 2. In chapter 2, it starts to get into discussing a little bit more so of an overview. But one of the first things that it starts to talk about is our government and how involved our government is in regulating drugs. Back in the day, they had what we call laissez-faire type of mentality in regards to drugs. A lot of things it wasn't something that was highly regulated. That was probably in the 1800s. Obviously, you guys know now that we have a lot more laws regarding drugs, a lot more money in our system goes into handling situations with drugs, whether that's putting people into prison, law enforcement, all the different things that accompany trying to handle our drug situation. They talk about three main things that are reasons why they felt the need to put in more laws and regulations regarding drugs. The first one is toxicity. Toxicity basically means it's something that's going to harm our body. And as you guys will see a little bit more in chapter 3, we get into what's regulated, what's not regulated through like the FDA and businesses, new drugs, prescription drugs, and obviously most illicit drugs are not going to go through any type of process. And the big problem that we're seeing now, and probably when you guys start to do some of your research on the newer stuff that's happening, you're going to see the big issue is people putting materials into the drugs that we don't know about. And those are the things that are causing a lot of the problems with deaths and illness because people don't even know what they're putting into their body. In regards to toxicity, make sure that you know that they have acute, what we call acute effects from drugs and their toxicity versus chronic. Acute is going to be something that happens right away. So when you talk about acute behavioral, it's going to be some type of behavior that right away happens after taking some type of a drug. So this is where you're talking about some type of impaired behavior when you drink alcohol or you take cocaine or whatever it is. Like what we call when we say people are intoxicated. Okay, the physiological acute is going to be something physical that happens right away. And in regards to this, most times we talk about when people overdose. It's going to physically cause them to stop breathing, their heart to stop beating, something immediate and very dangerous. Then for the chronic, that's going to be something that happens over time. So for chronic behavioral, there's actually studies that show that with chronic use, sometimes people's actual personality changes, their everyday behavior, whether it's someone who's using alcohol for a long amount of time or marijuana for a long amount of time or cocaine for a long amount of time, their actual personality changes, and that would be considered a chronic behavioral issue. For chronic physiological issue, those are a lot of the things that we think about commonly when we talk about issues with drugs in regards to things like lung cancer that comes from smoking for an extended amount of time, or liver disease, which comes from alcohol for an extended amount of time. So make sure you kind of understand that breakdown. When we're talking about toxicity, it also mentions what's called the DAWN system, and that is a system that they have that detects or that looks at it's a drug abuse warning network, and they take statistics, and a lot of emergency rooms participate in it. And you actually have a chart on page 26 that kind of shows you what some of the people who are coming in through the emergency room, what is the major concern. A couple things to remember with them is not every emergency room participates, so you have to keep that in mind. And then you also have to keep in mind that they don't look at just alcohol incidences. They only really document it if it's an alcohol with something else. So when you look at that chart, you'll see it says alcohol in combination. It's not just alcohol by itself. If you look at the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control, they also take in a lot of numbers. And if you want to look at actual deaths, they do some research on that, but it has to come from like death certificates where the cause is actually listed on the death certificate. But in your book, it talks a little bit about that. And it says from 2010, there was about 40,000 drug overdose deaths. So that's important to keep in mind. It also kind of transitions in toxicity to talking about blood-borne diseases, because those are also obviously harmful to your body, and a lot of it comes from using needles and things that we use with drug abuse. So talk about HIV, AIDS, hepatitis, and how some of those things had kind of exploded in when all these intravenous drugs started coming out. People were using them and not using them safely and sharing needles and things like that, which I'm sure all of you guys have heard about, because as we grow up and learn about AIDS and HIV, a lot of times they talk about that. But they kind of include that in the toxicity issue with drugs. You guys will also get a chance to read a little box that talks about some syringe laws and what are those, because we've gone from, where people had to actually have prescriptions for those, which then, made it harder for people to get access, which then again was probably why more people were sharing and things like that. And now you see programs where people actually go out into the street and hand out needles. So we'll probably, again, that might be something that you're interested in looking into, and you're actually going to have a question about that you're going to have to answer. So maybe you'll get to do a little bit of outside research in regards to some of those different programs. And then also the media thing, you guys have a discussion question on, but talking about bath salts and how that's kind of come out a lot in the media right now. And, are they really as bad as the media is saying, or is it because the media is putting it out there that's why we're so concerned about it? So I'm excited to see what some of you guys have to say in regards to that situation. The second thing that they talk about in regards to drugs and why we wanted to put in more regulations is the dependency part of it. And we have a couple of different terminology in there that you want to make sure you understand. So tolerance is just going to be the idea that your body adjusts to what you're putting in it. And so let's say, for instance, if you're putting something into your body that acts like a chemical that's already in our body, like let's say a neurotransmitter like dopamine, that you're putting it in your body's going to register that if there's too much, it's going to stop making its own. And then when you stop taking the part that you're putting in yourself, your body's going to feel like it's in withdrawal because it's not making enough on its own anymore. So that's where some of that comes from. And so that's the kind of the concept that you have to continue to put more and more, because our body adjusts, our receptors adjust, and then your body needs more and more to feel that effect. So that's tolerance. You have physical dependence versus psychological dependence. Physical dependence is that where you get those withdrawal symptoms. Your body has physically become reliant on whatever that substance is. And when you don't have it, you're going to start to see those withdrawal symptoms, which could be anything. My grandmother's an alcoholic, and when she would go through withdrawal symptoms, she thought people were living in her fish tank, and she was trying to feed them. She would go out and she would be on her porch holding court. She thought she was a judge or something. She thought snakes were coming out of the wall. So she would see things and hear things. And but it can be shaking. It can be sweats. It can be sick to your stomach. It can be hallucinations, delusions. There's so many different things that can go into withdrawal symptoms. But that's the physical dependence part of it. And like I said, a lot of that comes from what's physically happening in your body with your already there receptors, neurotransmitters, and how they're being manipulated. For psychological, that's a little bit different. That's more of the craving part and more of how we kind of condition ourselves. Sometimes with this, we talk about classical conditioning and operant conditioning, where we get some type of a reinforcement, and so we want to continue that behavior. So if when we take the drug, it makes us feel good and happy, we want to continue to do that because we want to continue to have that that reward or that reinforcement. So that's the psychological is a little bit more on that end, and usually, that's with a pretty high rate of drug use. Let's see. I do want to just mention the DSM part that's in your book. The DSM, if you don't know what it is, it's a book that classifies all the disorders, psychological disorders. And basically it gives you criteria. So the tricky thing about addiction and some of these alcohol and substance related disorders is you have to meet the criteria to technically be diagnosed by someone. So if you look at that box, one of the things it says is you have to have manifested at least 2 of these things listed within the last 12-month period. Most people who have a drug or alcohol problem are probably going to be classified, but you have to keep in mind sometimes if they don't meet those actual criteria, we might not be able to actually diagnose them with a problem. And a lot of times to be diagnosed with a problem, it has to impair your functioning somehow, or your social functioning, your job functioning. And when you think about it, probably everybody knows somebody who uses substances consistently, but still performs their job and still has friendships and still has a family. So at what point are those people really having an issue? Is that something we need to address, or because they're not going to get diagnosed based on this chart? Are they fine? And is that fine that they use, marijuana every day as long as it's not causing any issues? So those are some of the things that we have to think about. So there is a little chart in there that you can kind of look over for in regards to the DSM. It talks a little bit about what causes the dependence, and there's so many different thoughts about it. But, is it the actual substance itself? Is it how our body processes it, and then what our body decides to do with it in regards to like our receptors and what we need and how we're feeling, the reinforcement, the conditioning. But kind of an interesting chart, again, is you have one that shows you chance of dependency after so much time. And if you look early on, if you're only after a year of use, dependency is pretty low in most of them, except for cocaine is a little bit higher. Then when you go to after 10 years of use, you see that those numbers jump, and most of them have a much higher chance of dependency. And then it actually talks about a lifetime estimate. So that's some pretty good information for you guys to take a look at. Is it biological? Just like we talked about before, there is some genetic information in regards to substance abuse and addiction and dependence. Some of it we do think it has to do with dopamine. Some of it we think has to do with certain areas of your brain. It also talks in here about is there what's called an addictive personality? And basically when we talk about that, we talk a lot about people who have certain traits like impulsivity. Think about it. If you're someone who's impulsive and you make decisions without really thinking them through, does that make you more likely to participate in drug behavior, alcohol behavior, things like that? Possibly. There's also what we call like a sensation-seeking type of trait where people they seek sensation. They want to go out and experience things, and people who like to go skydiving and do things like that. And if you have that personality where you're seeking out that constant sensation, would you be more likely to partake in some of these drugs and things like that? Probably. So we're looking a lot into not just some of the genes and the things that are going on in our brain and our neurotransmitters, but also what are some of these personality traits, and does that have an effect on who's choosing to use drugs? And if they are choosing to use them, why do some people become dependent and some people don't, or some people become addicted and some people don't? The third thing that they talk about is crime, and that's a big issue, and we're going to talk a little bit about it, as we go throughout. But the basics right now that I want you to pay attention to is there's kind of 4 things that they mention in how are drugs and crime related. And they talk about, one is, do drugs actually cause somebody's personality to change? And if they do they cause someone's personality to change in a way that is going to make them commit crimes? Okay, then they say, all right, what about just people who are under the influence of drugs? So in that moment, is that more likely to make people commit crimes? They talk about drug use itself as a crime. So if you're willing to do drugs and it's a crime, you're already committing a crime. You're already a criminal. So then chances of you committing other criminal behavior, are those higher? Okay, so those are a few of them. And then they also talk about money, like how many people commit crimes to get money to take care of their, to be able to pay for their drugs or pay for their habit. People who maybe do prostitution or people who steal things to be able to get money to pay for their drugs to take care of their habit. So those are all major issues that we have in regards to trying to figure out how big of an issue drug use is and what effect does it really have on our crime rates, and is it something we do need to put a lot of attention into in regards to funding law enforcement type of things. And that's really kind of an overview of chapter 2. And like I said, look through, make sure you look at those charts, and then we'll move on to chapter 3.